the last video about the last generation of the Rekord series, and in this video we are going to be talking about the last car to name itself the Rekord, and actually as the first Rekord ever had a major facelift in its generation, in my opinion making the second phase unrecognizable in comparison to the first phase. Also known as the Vauxhall Carlton in Great Britain, the Opel Rekord E was a popular mid-size car produced by Opel between 1977 and 1986, during which it had two main versions, the E1 being produced between 1977 and 1982 and the E2 being produced between 1982 and 1986. Known for its reliability and spacious design, the Rekord E came in various body styles: a 2-door limousine, a 4-door limousine, a 3- and 5-door station wagon marketed as the Caravan, and a 3-door panel van. This series held a significant position in Opel's lineup, preceding the Opel Omega as the flagship large sedan. The Rekord E was known for its sleek yet practical design, prioritizing aerodynamics with an impressive drag coefficient of 0.418. The model featured larger dimensions than its predecessor, offering more cabin space and comfort. The E1 models retained a more conventional design, while the E2 facelift introduced a flatter front grille, improved headlights, and other cosmetic updates for a more modern look, really making the car look like a 1980s car. Phase 1 was 4.6 meters long and the Phase 2 eventually was 4.65 meters long. And engine-wise, the two phases of the Rekord were kind of divided. The first phase basically had the same exact engines as the Rekord D, except for the 2.0e, which basically was a 2-liter injection engine with 110 horsepower. But also diesel-wise there was an improvement, as the 2.1D with 60 horsepower in the Rekord D was replaced by a 2.3D with 65 horsepower in 1978. The engines in the first phase between 1977 and 1982 were as following. The smallest engine, just like in the Rekord D, remained to be the 1.7N, and it was produced between 1977 and 1980, as it had a power output of 60 horsepower and 112 Nm, pushing the car up to around 145 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise it was actually quite fuel inefficient, as it had an estimated fuel efficiency of 10 liters per 100 km, and it wasn't fast as well, as it had a 0 to 100 time of around 21 seconds. The 1.7N engine was the only engine that could be paired with a 4-speed manual, as there were no other gearboxes available for it, as the others had a 3-speed automatic transmission optional as well. It also remained to be the one and only engine that was taken out of production before the end of Phase 1, as this engine was taken out of production in 1980, as well as the 2.1D in 1978, so it makes 2 engines in total, when Phase 2 actually was introduced in 1982. The 1.7N was followed up by another normal petrol engine, as this was the 1.9N. This was available between 1977 and 1982, with a bit more horsepower and torque at 75 horsepower and 132 Nm, and had a little higher top speed at 155 km an hour. Fuel consumption wise it was even more or less fuel efficient, at an average fuel consumption of 10.5 liters per 100 km, yet it was a lot faster, rated at a 0 to 100 time of 16.5 seconds. And this engine basically was a bigger 1.7N with a fuel consumption that was a little bit higher, but also with much better specifications, making cruising on the highways much easier. And then the biggest normal petrol powered engine was the 2-liter N, which basically also was in production between 1977 and 1982 and had a power output of 90 horsepower and 142 Nm. It gave the car a normal and, in my opinion, quite good top speed of 165 km an hour, was a little bit less fuel efficient than 1.9N, rated at 11 liters per 100 km, and it had a 0 to 100 time of only 14.5 seconds, which was quite modest. This engine was the only engine to have a super petrol variant, and this was called the 2-liter S. The 2-liter S was also in production between 1977 and 1982 and had much more power at 101 horsepower and 155 Nm, making a top speed of 171 km an hour possible, and having a fuel consumption a bit less, rated at 9.5 liters per 100 km, actually being more fuel efficient. 0 to 100 time wise, it was also faster than the 2-liter normal petrol, as it was 13 seconds. And you also, as said before, had a fuel injected variant of the 2-liter called the 2.0E. And this was also in production during its whole period between 1977 and 1982 and was more powerful than the 2-liter S with 110 horsepower and 159 Nm, giving the car a very good top speed of 180 km an hour with a fuel consumption of around 9.5 liters per 100 km. And also the 0 to 100 time was actually better, rated at 12.5 seconds. This engine was a bit more powerful than the already more powerful 2.0S, and it was a bit more fuel efficient, a bit faster, and was Opel's first fuel injection engines to be fitted in a model made by Opel. It was actually the start of the fuel injection. Besides petrol engines, you also had various diesel engines, and this generation didn't have engines smaller for specific markets, like the Rekord D 2.0 diesel was, for instance, in the Italian market. The diesel engines were as following. You had the 2.1 liter diesel, which was available between 1977 and 1978 and basically was taken straight out of the Rekord D. It had a power output of 60 horsepower and 130 Nm, had a top speed of 138 km an hour and had an average fuel consumption of 7.8 liters per 100 km. It was actually quite slow, as the 0 to 100 time was 24 seconds, and this engine was in production for 1 year in the Rekord E, as it was succeeded by the 2.3D in 1978. The 2.3D was produced between 1978 and 1982, as it was the successor, and it was more powerful, as the power output was 65 horsepower and 127 Nm, giving the car a slightly higher top speed rated at 140 km an hour, being a bit less fuel efficient rated at 8.5 liters per 100 km, and also being a bit faster rated at 22.5 seconds 0 to 100 time. The automatic transmissions actually slowed each engine down by around 1.5 seconds mostly for the petrol engines and up to 4 seconds for the diesel engines. The second phase Rekord E2 was, in my opinion, revolutionary, as it implemented more fuel injected engines and even a turbocharged 2.3 liter diesel. These engines that came with this phase made the car seem more modern, in my opinion, mostly because the first phase had engines taken out of the older Rekord D. Between 1982 and 1986, the models had engines in the following order. The 1.8N was the smallest engine, and it had replaced the 1.7N, and this was a normal petrol engine, producing 75 horsepower and 135 Nm. It had a top speed of 160 km an hour, while still maintaining an average fuel consumption of 9.5 liters per 100 km. It was in production the whole phase between 1982 and 1986, and it was quite decent powered, as it had a 0 to 100 time of only 17 seconds. This engine basically was the same as the 1.7N, as this was only available with the 4-speed manual and not with a 3-speed automatic. It kind of had taken over the place of the 1.7N in this case. There actually was a 1.8 super petrol engine available called the 1.8S, and this had 90 horsepower and 145 Nm. It was way more powerful, as it had a top speed of 173 km an hour while still having a decent fuel consumption of 9 liters per 100 km. It also could be optioned with a 5-speed transmission, as this gave the car actually a lower fuel consumption at 8.5 liters per 100 km. This engine also was available during the whole second phase between 1982 and 1986, and the 0 to 100 time was 14.5 seconds and around 14.3 seconds for the 5-speed. You also had a fuel injection for the 1.8 called the 1.8i. This had 100 horsepower and 140 Nm, while still having a top speed of 173 km an hour. It had an average fuel consumption not much better than the 1.8S, rated at 9 liters per 100 km and 8.6 liters per 100 km for the 5-speed, as this engine also was capable of being fitted with the 5-speed, and this was actually introduced in its second to last year of the production of the Rekord E in 1985, and it was also available for 1985 up until 1986. It was actually a bit faster than the 1.8S, as the 0 to 100 time was 13.5 seconds and was actually 13.3 seconds for the 5-speed. And it was followed up by another super petrol engine, because the 2-liter normal petrol was taken out of production. The 2-liter S had 100 horsepower, 152 Newton meters, and actually gave the car a top speed a bit higher than the normal predecessor at 181 kilometers an hour. It had an average fuel consumption actually quite the same, remaining at 9 liters per 100 kilometers, and this was also available with the 5-speed, rated at 8.8 liters, a bit more fuel efficient. It was also available between 1982 and 1986, although the 5-speed was available between 1984 and 1986, and it had a quite quick acceleration of 12.5 seconds from a 0 to 100 time, although the 5-speed was actually a bit faster, rated at 12.3 seconds. You also had the same 2.0e, which was the injected engines, and this had 110 horsepower and 162 Newton meters, being still a bit more powerful than the 2-liter S. This also gave the car a higher top speed of 187 kilometers an hour, while being more fuel efficient, rated at 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers. And this was actually available up until 1984, between 1982 and 1984, and it had the same 0 to 100 time, 12 seconds. And this engine was always paired with the 5-speed manual or the optional 3-speed automatic. It was actually succeeded in 1984 by the 2.2e, a 2.2 liter fuel injected engine, and this had 115 horsepower and much more torque, rated at 182 Newton meters. This gave the car a very good top speed of 190 kilometers an hour, while still having an average fuel consumption of 8.5 liters per 100 kilometers. It was produced in the second phase as the successor of the 2-liter E, and was produced between 1984 and 1986, and gave the car a very good 0 to 100 acceleration of 10.5 seconds for the 4-speed manual or 10.3 seconds for the 5-speed. Besides the petrol engines, you had the same 2.3D, although the 2.3D actually was improved in 1983, as between 1982 and 1983 it actually was the same 2.3 liter diesel with 65 horsepower, 127 Newton meters of torque, and actually a higher top speed, rated at 155 kilometers an hour. This engine could be fitted with the 5-speed manual as well, as the fuel consumption was 7 liters per 100 kilometers for the 4-speed manual and 6.8 liters for the 5-speed. It actually was produced between 1982 and 1983, basically also between 1978 and 1982, and it had a 0 to 100 time of 23 seconds or 22.6 for the 5-speed. It was succeeded by a more powerful 2.3 liter diesel with 70 horsepower and 135 Newton meters, a slight increase. This also gave the car a higher top speed of 160 km an hour, a fuel consumption actually quite the same at 7 liters per 100 km for the 4-speed manual and a lower 6.7 liters per 100 km for the 5-speed, and this was available for the rest of the phase 2 between 1983 and 1986. It was also quite fast, a bit faster than the 2.3D, with a 0 to 100 time of 20.5 seconds for the 4-speed manual and 20 seconds for the 5-speed. Eventually Opel decided to turbocharge its diesel engines, and the 2.3D was a turbocharged, called the 2.3 turbo diesel. It had 86 horsepower and an astonishing 189 Newton meters, giving the car a slightly higher top speed than the 2.3D with 70 horsepower, rated at 168 km an hour, while being more fuel efficient, rated at 6.5 liters per 100 kilometers. This engine was available between 1982 and 1986, basically a year after the introduction of the more powerful 2.3 liter diesel, and the 0 to 100 acceleration also was much faster than before, rated at 15.5 seconds from 0 to 100. This engine, just like the 2 liter E, also was only paired with either a 5-speed manual or the optional 3-speed automatic transmission. It was much faster than the normal 2.3D, while even being more powerful and more fuel efficient. It was a good start for Opel with the diesels and would later become a bigger interest of Opel. The diesel engine also was quite distinctive, as it had a difference in the hood rather than the other models. This was because the engine was taller than the other engines and therefore needed a small bump in the hood to give it enough space to be able to lay underneath the car. Most Rekord E engines were paired with either a 4-speed manual or a 3-speed automatic transmission, with later models offering a 5-speed manual and overdrive in selected trims, really showing innovations Opel made engine and transmission wise during the 1980s. Opel released various special editions of the Rekord E, such as the sporty SRE and luxury-oriented Phase 1 Berliner, and later for the Phase 2 the sporty Sport Edition and luxurious CD, GLS and Berliner editions. These models often featured a unique upholstery, alloy wheels and distinctive badging. The SRE, for instance, included two-tone paint and was available as a sedan or a caravan, catering to customers seeking a more dynamic look and feel. For the second phase, the rarest trim of the Opel Rekord E was likely the GLS trim, which offered higher specification and more luxury features than the standard trims. These versions often included additional equipment like upgraded interiors, more advanced electronics and distinctive styling, making them less common compared to the basic trims. This was also for the CD trim as well. Throughout its production, Opel manufactured nearly 1 million units of the Rekord E, making it a common sight across Europe in the 1980s. The car's build quality and reputation for reliability made it popular with families, business owners and fleet managers alike, and the Rekord E1 alone was produced for 962,280 times, with the E2 model also enjoying robust sales, although it is unclear what those exact numbers were. The Rekord E competed with the Ford Granada, offering similar size and performance in the large family car segment, the Volkswagen Passat, which was known for its practicality and dependability, and the Peugeot 505, which blended comfort with European styling. In 1986, Opel introduced the Omega as the Rekord E successor, featuring modern technology, improved design and better performance, reflecting shifting market trends, prioritizing higher comfort and advanced capabilities. A special version of the Rekord E was the Chevrolet Rekord, sold in Africa. The Chevrolet Rekord E was available between 1978 and 1983. It was a South African version of GM's Rekord, offered as a 4-door sedan and a 5-door wagon. It was powered by various engines, a 2-liter inline-4 producing 100 horsepower, which was Opel based between 1980 and 1982, a 2.3-liter inline-4 engine with 92 horsepower based on the Chevrolet 236 between 1977 and 1982, and a more unknown 2.8-liter inline-6 with 106 horsepower, introduced in 1982. The Chevrolet Rekord E was rebadged as an Opel in 1984, marking the end of its Chevrolet branding in the region. Thanks for watching this last video in this series. These videos started to push my channel to the public, and I'm very thankful for the people who have been here on my channel because of these videos. I will be continuing with different Opel models from now on, and if you haven't subscribed already, please don't forget to subscribe and also check out this playlist with many interesting videos about the automotive industry. And also check out my other Opel Cadet videos already, and I will see you in the next video.